And we're joined on the phone today by author Jon Wiederhorn, and we're talking about his new book, Raising Hell, Backstage Tales from the Lives of Metal Legends. Hey, Jon, how you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good, Dustin. Thanks.
It's great to be speaking with you. Thank you so much for your time.
Sure thing. Thanks for having me.
Well, let's talk a bit about your new book here, Raising Hell, Backstage Tales from the Lives of Metal Legends. What are the listeners in for with the new book?
Oh, boy. It's a bunch of stories from musicians of all calibers of metal, from the days of the 70s to hair metal to thrash to death metal, black metal. And what I wanted to do with it was really get all these guys together and get a feel for what metal culture and lifestyle is within not only some of these different subgenres, but just within the whole super field of metal in general. Now, it's not really set up as a history because I've actually done a metal oral history that I did with my co-writer, Catherine Turman, about 7 years ago, called Louder Than Hell. And that came off quite well, and the response was great. But what I noticed when I was going through it was the parts that I was most interested in and excited about were the stories, were the anecdotes, were the outrageous incidents that happened to these guys who live excessive lives. So I thought it would be great to just get together 125 or so individuals and ask them specific questions about different elements of the metal lifestyle. And then each is named after a famous metal song, each chapter. And the subject matter deals with the lyric, not the actual song itself, but the sort of suggested content of the song. For instance, Welcome to Hell, which is a song by Venom, deals with the occult and supernatural, whereas Girls, 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 a Motley Crue song, is really all about groupies and women on the road and women who help sustain the lifestyles of starving musicians and women musicians themselves. So, quite a lot of groups.
Well, talk to me a bit about how you put this together. I mean, because you've got stories from, the big guy. You've got Ozzy and Rob Halford, Pantera, and then you've got, you mentioned some of the more obscure, I guess I would say, like subgenre bands. I mean, just about everybody is in this book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I didn't want to just focus on the top tier of metal bands, so I wanted to get a bunch of those guys in. And having interviewed bands for 25 years or so, I've developed a good relationship with a great number of them, having written articles for magazines and newspapers and working on Louder Than Hell. So I have a pretty good sense of who's important in what subgenres and also who has interesting things to say, who's not going to just give you generic answers to questions. Iron Maiden, I love them dearly, but they're a very tough interview. They're these polite English gentlemen, and they don't really need to reveal too much about themselves at this point. They don't need to tell outrageous stories, so I didn't really want to talk to them. And they probably didn't want to talk to me, so we're even. But on the other hand, people sometimes equate Priest and Maiden together. I have a great relationship with Judas Priest. Love Rob Halford and Glenn Tipton, who at the time was in pretty good health. Unfortunately, he's suffered some medical conditions, but he was very acute when I talked to him less than 2 years ago. And recently, I've seen him on stage, and he's looked pretty good too. So, my fingers are crossed for him and his medical issues. But that notwithstanding, Glenn and Rob both had great stories, and some of them surprised me. I mean, I didn't realize these guys were basically kleptomaniacs when they started out in Birmingham, England. They didn't have any money. They'd play these gigs at venues that didn't pay them, so they'd steal whatever wasn't bolted down. And they took microphones, they took little bits of lighting rigs, or little lights from different stages, and built their own lighting rig out of it, so that they could have a more spectacular stage show. And I appreciated that they didn't deny that was part of their existence, or part of their history, that they were proud to talk about all of the eras of the priest legacy.
Excellent. Again, author Jon Wiederhorn with us. So we're talking about his new book here, Raising Hell, Backstage Tales from the Lives of Metal Legends. And John, one thing I appreciated about the book, you don't dedicate a lot of time to, stories we've heard a million times, like, Led Zeppelin and the Shark and Ozzy and the Alamo and that sort of thing. Even for, big metal fans, a lot of these stories in here are new to everybody.
I'm really glad you noticed that. I had a little bit of a mental dilemma because there are tried and true metal stories like Ozzy biting the head off of a bat, Ozzy biting the head off of a dove, the horrible Metallica bus crash that killed Cliff Burton, Black Sabbath almost being stabbed on stage, Judas Priest running a motorcycle into a stage, part of the stage set. There are all these kind of well-known and slightly lesser-known stories, and so many of them were addressed in my other book, Louder Than Hell, so I really didn't want to go back there. And so I wanted to introduce audiences to new stories and kind of come up with the new mythology, the new legends of metal, and hopefully they'll, take these stories and tell them to their friends and their kids and whatever, and maybe these things will... some of these stories will become, kind of new legends.
Well, does it seem, of course, when you think of kind of Raising Hell and Excess and all that, you think of the 80s and, a lot of stuff happened then, but does it seem like these kind of wild antics, are they still happening today with the newer bands? Are they still doing a lot of that stuff?
It depends on what bands you're talking about, really. I know Asking Alexandria had years of extremism, debauchery, alcoholism, and I know some of the members had drug issues, and they've talked about them at length. So not letting anything out of the bag there. And then there are other bands who also embrace that hedonistic aspect of metal, and it's there if you want it. I just think there's an awful lot of bands now who have either seen it done in the past and also seen how it almost destroyed a number of fantastic artists, and actually did destroy some who weren't able to clean up in time and sadly passed away from their addictions. So that was a warning call, I think. But in addition to that, right now you have an era where everyone's walking around with cell phones and filming everything. So if you're backstage at a venue and you kind of have the urge to defecate in the corner just for kicks, which some guys have done back in the day, not that long ago, that's probably not going to happen because there's a pretty good chance someone's going to film you and you're going to end up on all of the, scandalous websites and become a viral video that maybe you don't want out there. So I think people are filming everything, and nothing is private anymore.
Well, again, the new book, Raising Hell, is out. And, John, I wish we had some more time here, but I really appreciate you being on with me today. Thank you so much.
Happy to do it, and glad you like the book.
And again, that was author Jon Wiederhorn and his new book, Raising Hell, Backstage Tales from the Lives of Metal Legends, is out now.